the world remittances is $440 billion. For Africa, or the developing world, is getting $325 billion, and Africa is getting $30 billion on remittances yearly. At least in the 2010 data indicates that. And Sub-Saharan Africa gets around $21 billion.
So it's quite small in the global scheme, isn't it?
Is higher than foreign direct investment coupled together with the official development aid for Africa. So basically, the $325 billion of remittances is higher than official development aid. So it's something that countries need to look into in terms of how they can use the untapped potential of these remittances for development. I think that's the biggest challenge now.
Do you think countries have recognized the importance of these remittances?
They're not. There's around, I would estimate around $15 billion that is untapped. Because the remittance, the cost of the transaction cost of remittances to Africa is the highest, around 10 to 15%, compared to the global transaction cost of remittance, which is around 8.7%. So if Africa is able to reduce the cost of the transaction cost of remittances, let's say to 6%, which is the percentage in Latin America, and use diaspora bonds, which is not used much in Africa, I would say that there is around $15 billion a year of untapped potential that the African continent is not using. Is
this something governments are waking up to, and also, of course, needs the buy-in of the financial sector, doesn't it?
Yes, indeed, but there are some cases in some countries that are already using diaspora bonds. Israel, India, for instance, in Sri Lanka, Israel has diaspora bonds in an amount of $25 billion. India has diaspora bonds around $1.6 billion. And Africa is not yet using diaspora bonds, and this is something that certainly governments and financial sector should wake up and start using diaspora bonds. But not only diaspora bonds, but also to use the diaspora as the remittances as part of credit rating of countries, which would also add more value to investments.
How about inter-regional movement of money? Because it's not just money coming from outside of Africa. I should imagine there is a large amount of money moving around within the continent itself. Yes,
in Sub-Saharan Africa, from the $21 billion on remittances, around $4.5 billion is within Africa. So it's of course a smaller percentage compared to the overall remittances that come from outside Africa. But certainly, what is interesting in all that is the transaction cost of remittances within Africa and the ones coming from outside Africa remains highest and remains the same, around 11 to 15%.
How do we bring those transaction costs down?
Certainly, the financial institutes like MoneyGram and all others, they need to work together with the governments and the institutions like the UN and my institution, the International Organization for Migration, to look at how we can channel this transactional cost for development. And between 30 to 40% of those the remittances received by the continent goes to rural areas. And certainly another area to explore in terms of how to use these remittances for development is how those remittances can be connected to financial services like loans, credit loans, and deposits that would actually support development.
Are we talking about money coming through the formal sector here? Does this include also money that's perhaps passed with a taxi driver and taken to a village and given to the recipient? Is this just the formal sector movement we're talking about?
We are only talking about formal sector, because if we add the other informal sector, then the remittances amounts in Africa is much higher than the figures that I just mentioned.
How can technology perhaps be used to bring down the cost of these remittances? Because we have seen banks linking up with cell phone operators, which helps you to get money to rural areas. Do you think this plays an important role in bringing down the cost of those remittances?
Yes, indeed. And some countries in Africa, they start using that, for instance, the cell phone. But so far, all is at national level. I think for the remittances to benefit from the technology initiatives like the cell phone and the prepaid transfers in terms of using cell phone, that would require countries to start creating a framework that will allow transfers to happen from one country to the other, which means that the remittances cost would also reduce drastically.
What sort of role can the International Organization for Migration play in all of this and helping to develop this market and formalize it more so we can see lower costs?
Yeah. Certainly, the migrants is the group that sends remittances back home, whether they are in the continent or outside the continent. I think that tap into the potential of migrants, both from the remittance perspective, but also from the engagement of the diaspora for development, because in addition to remittances, there are skills that are out of the continent, out of the country, that can be used in the country. I think the bottom line is how we can create the framework that both the remittances and the skills of the diaspora is used for development. And there, certainly my organization, the National Organization for Migration, has a very, very, very keen role. And we have quite a large experience in terms of looking at the skill sets return to the continent and use the skills for development. But that is, in fact, to look at the remittances, we need to work together with the government, the banks, and the non-government organizations like IOM and the UN to create the framework that will allow that to happen.
And just also, I mean, apart from the money and the strength that could give to financial systems, the money being brought back into Africa, what's it being used for typically? I mean, is this helping to further education, pay for healthcare? How is this money being utilized?
In fact, that's one of the challenges now. A larger percentage of the money being brought is not used for the development. Now, most of it is used, of course, to buy groceries, to pay education. Part of it is used to, of course, for investments, construction, or building a house back home. I mean, I am a migrant myself. I left Mozambique in 1994, and I've been sending remittances for several issues, including family. So most of the remittances all the data shows that most of it goes to sustain household or families that are back home. Of course, that's working with financial institutes. These remittances could be connected to loans and credit loans, which then would really bring the capacity and the possibility to use the remittances for development.